There's a lot of ground I can cover tonight, and what I want to do is just talk for a few minutes, and really what I want to get is your questions. I'm not actually in Washington much. I certainly have friends there. I have, dear professional friends actually in this administration, but I consciously chose to get out of the business, when I retired in 2011. The best thing I do is teach these 20 or 25, 24 seniors at Princeton every fall. A course that they let me put together called U.S. Military Power, U.S. Diplomatic Power, Achieving the Right Balance, with the underpinning theme being we've used the military just a little too much. Do you think we could put the rest of our government to work? And I'm on the pointy end. I'm on the pointy end of that use, and I'd seen it and I watched it in 2 administrations up close and personal. So if you want to talk about that, I can do that as well. We do spend a lot of time. I mean, while I was chairman, in these wars we've lost, both before and after, over 7,000 young ones and some 60,000, 70,000 wounded. We spent a lot of time with those families at those funerals, and we, as an active duty military, know precious little about the veteran space. You would think, the American people would think we would. We don't. We know our people are transitioning to be veterans, but we don't know who they are. We don't know what happens there. And what I have found out as I've invested my time is it's badly broken space. It's shameful what we don't provide for those who've served and their families, and it's been going on for a long time, a long time. This isn't one administration or another. It's been broken for decades, and it's an incredibly difficult space to lead in. So what I try to do, with literally almost all my volunteer time, is spend time in that space. And my wife on family issues that are associated with that space. And for the record, I know I'm a Navy guy, and I know I went to the school right down the road here, but I'm a joint guy. One of the things I said as the CNO, head of the Navy, and I didn't intend it to be attention-getting per se, but when you're in Washington, and I was the money guy, one of the rules is you hoard yours and you try to steal everybody else's. And when I was CNO, and we're at war now, in Iraq it's not going well, when I was CNO, basically I said very publicly that I believe, and I believe it to this day, that the U.S. Army is a center of gravity for our military, And if the Army does well, everybody does well, and if the Army doesn't do well, nobody does well. And I said that when I was the CNO, and somehow Gates picked up on that. And then I surprisingly, among many surprises in my career in terms of the jobs that I held, but surprisingly, I get selected to be chairman, and I relieve Pete Pace. My 3rd year here, I lived across the hall from Pete Pace. My roommate dated his wife before they met. I'd known Pete since I was 21 and he was 22. And we went different ways, obviously, and we come back, and now I'm relieving him because and the reason, and Pete would never say this, I know he was here, but he would never say this, and maybe he was here before he was, I don't know if he was on active duty or not at the time, yeah. But Pete just got caught in the political crosshairs, firestorm. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about that, if you'll bear with me at some point, about military and some retired military in the political space. It doesn't work very well. Pete Pace is a great example. So I was now a sailor, and I got 2 ground wars. One in Iraq, it's not going well. One in Afghanistan, we don't have enough forces there. And there's also a 3rd one, by the way, as we're fighting a lot of really bad guys who are terrorists. And so what I did, I don't know how else to do it. And this goes to our training, what I would call shipboard training. I don't know how else to do it except get on the ground in their space, try to live with them and understand what they're going through. And I'm asking young men and women to die for our country. And I want to know what they're doing. And I want to know I'm giving them every possible tool, every possible opportunity to succeed in that mission. When people ask me about becoming chairman, My response is, first of all, it was a big surprise. The meeting, Gates called me, and I'm in town for 10 years. You have your antenna up. You think you know what's going on. Gates calls me in and asks me, that said the president wanted me to take the job. I had no idea. So it's always a reminder, you think you know what's going on, and you never really know what's going on. I needed to find out what was going on the ground, and that's where I invested my time. Two things, 2.2 million men and women in uniform, half on active duty and half in the reserves. And I wanted, as a commander, because that's what I did my whole life, I wanted, over a period of time, to make sure those young people knew that they had somebody that cared about them, that had an idea what they were going through, that would fight for them when that was required. That was really job two. Job one was to advise the President, Secretary of Defense, and that's the job that's actually in the law. And so you become chairman, and it's a great honor. Middle-class kid from Southern California can rise to this position in a great country. And to go to the White House is a great thrill every time. The hair goes up on the back of your neck, and when it stops going up on the back of your neck, you need to stop going, basically, because it's that special a place. It is. It is also Mars and Venus for a military guy. There's no training for it. There's no deputy job. You don't get to sit there for 2 or 3 years and watch it happen and say, well, I guess this is how I do it. You walk in, and you're the only person standing at the highest level of government for these major debates and discussions in the military. And everybody else in there, and this is not an administration. This is the way it's always been. It's politics, 24/7, 365. It's how they got there. It's what they do. And it should not surprise you, but I want to emphasize it. They don't go in there for a 4-year run. They go in for an 8-year run. And I've heard it from 2 administrations very early in the Obama administration. I'm in the Oval in week 1, and something had happened which was good, which was supporting the 8-year view, although they hadn't stated that. And Chief of Staff Admiral stands up, looks around all the politicals in the room, and it was a dozen of us, not me, but others, and said, don't you forget, we're here for 8 years. So when people ask me about the current administration, my reaction is, it's an 8-year run here, folks. And I get the, oh my God, I get it. I've certainly, but if you do the math, do the empirical evidence, it's very difficult to get rid of an incumbent. And when you look at Bush in 2004, you look at Obama in 2012, they were ripe for the picking at the time until the machines got warmed up. So it's just hard. It happens, but if you are planning on 4, I think the odds are against you. So I obviously watched this, but this is it's my country. It's my White House. I understand all that, but it's a foreign place. What I'm trying to do now is apolitically advise the President, National Security Council, the Secretary of Defense, and stay out of the politics and give them my view. And then when the President says, here we go, we march off and do it. Those are the rules. And I could spend a lot of time, and if you want me to, talk about that's the active duty side. So we've got this quote-unquote bulwark of generals now in this administration, and a lot of people are very comfortable with that. They're delighted with that for lots of reasons. Those are the same military guys I was working with a few years ago. I know their background, I know their limits, and they're terrific, terrific guys. But I am not one that's comfortable with generals in charge of our country or that close to it. That's not us, okay? And I can't tell you the number, including last night. I did a session at Georgetown with Madeleine Albright, who I think the world of, with a bunch of students. And she was, at one point, she spoke on how delighted she was to have Mattis, McMaster, and Kelly there. And as soon as she said it, I said, I just disagree. I understand the comfort factor. I mean, I do understand that, but that's not us. And so hopefully it's only temporary. And I can expand on that if you want to do that as well. I think the title, when Robbie asked me for the title, what am I going to talk about, was Is the U.S. in decline? Did I say is the U.S. in decline, or the U.S. is in decline? So two things. Oh, this is over the course of the last couple of years. I do a fair amount of speaking. I'm as concerned as any citizen with where we are as a country right now, and have been. And I started a couple years ago. Actually, before that, when I was on active duty, I would think about, are we in decline? I mean, we went through the '08 crash, and I was walking. Of course, I'm in a political town, and the political paralysis and polarization, even a few years ago, was unbelievable, and it's just worse now. So I was really concerned about what I saw in that regard. And so the question comes up, are we in decline? And if you're a historian, and I'm not, wouldn't pretend to be, but if you look at history and you look at great empires, what caused them to decline? And we need to have an answer to that question. And oftentimes it is the rich keep taking, and finally those that don't have anything get fed up, basically. And I have heard back to 1969 in my first deployment, pull into Hong Kong, coming off the gun line in Vietnam, and this family that's tacked up on this quay wall in this tin hut of 12 or 13 people, and one of the guides that was with us said, there's a good chance that 2 or 3 of those people will never leave that little box I was looking at. Hong Kong then, and even now, but Hong Kong's almost a perfect place for the haves and have-nots. But I've seen haves and have-nots all over the world. I've heard more about the haves and have-nots in our country in the last 5 years, 10 years, than I ever heard before that. And that's message traffic loud and clear. I can ignore it or do something about it. We need to do something about it. And that's us. And I'll talk, this will generally be a discouraging discussion tonight, but I am actually optimistic. And so I've transitioned from the question about are we in decline, we are in decline. And I believe that. And I'm a guy, once I want to, and I'd love to have discussions or arguments about it, but I think we are. There are an awful lot of indicators. And I'm going to make that assumption and work under that assumption until it's proven otherwise that we're not. So, and I'll walk through some of why I feel that way. And I know this is a foreign affairs discussion, and I'll talk to that. Maybe I'll pick on that a little bit. One of my measures now, as I meet my friends and other individuals from countries all over the world, and many of you travel, and I'd encourage you to think about it this way. What I've asked them to do, and these are a couple of very senior leaders, is to tell us what they see of us. We underestimate how big a deal we are because we live here to other countries around the world. And I have listened to people who both love and who hate us my whole life globally. And in each case, obviously, they love, hate, and respect us a great deal. And so a question for me now is, what are you seeing of us? I think it may even be too hard for us to understand that. But I want that information. Can you depend on us anymore? Do you think our leadership has eroded so much? What's your view of coming, quote unquote, coming home, if you will, in lots of ways? And how do you see the future? And how is it affecting you? In NATO, and I spent a lot of time in NATO, I can tell you one of the things that President Trump's done is he's made them start spending more money on defense. Not all of them, but a bunch of them. And I can tell you how many speeches I gave to all my colleagues they needed to do that, and Bob Gates and President Bush and President Obama, and they didn't spend a dime more. In fact, they were in the other direction. And I spent some time with a senior foreign official from Italy not too long ago, and she said, he's got our attention. We're spending more money. We're all talking about that. We're actually looking at a future without you. That's what they're telling us, okay? So, and the reason I say that is I want to understand from a little more objective and unemotional position than mine what's really happened. The other thing I ask them is don't give up on us in 1 year, for crying out loud, or 2, or 8. It took us 70 years to help build this with you. It's not all going away over the course of 1 decade, unless we let it go away. And that's another discussion. So I am concerned, and I actually now, about where we are as a country, where we're headed. And fundamentally, I'm a leader. I mean, the reason I love the Navy is because I had more responsibility than I deserved. I was going in places that I'd never imagined. I was in the middle of history, but most of all is just learn to lead. And that's what I cherish. Back to sort of the second mission while I'm chairman, leading those 2.2 million men and women, which didn't happen overnight. We're fundamentally bereft of leaders, globally, not just in our country. I was talking with a couple of you before, the people that are moving the needle right now from a leadership standpoint in the world, and usually it only takes a half a dozen or so. It's not like it takes 10 or 20 or 30. But the people who are moving the needle right now are Putin, who I think is the most dangerous guy on earth, Xi Jinping, who is now in for life, by the way. If you didn't, I don't know the exact words, but believe me, what happened yesterday or the day before was he's in for life. That's not a surprise. I have said for a long time, Putin and Xi Jinping are going to run their countries until they can't breathe. And we can plan on that, and we need to understand that. They're moving it, and then who else is moving the needle in the right direction? And you come up pretty short. And it's hard to get in that business now. We don't have great people in that business because we tear their skin off as soon as they start to run. And the other thing I learned, and this is a statement of the obvious, is there's politics all over the world. There's politics in every country. And in the end, all these incredibly complex issues have to have a political solution. So we have weak leaders, generally speaking, and we have the polarization here, but in many other countries as well. And so we're sort of drifting and defaulting to what happens as opposed to controlling outcomes here. The other leader that kind of is a surprise addition to the lineup that for the most part I believe is moving the needle in the right direction is the Pope. Because I think he's got the right message. I think he's got the right focus. I'm a little disappointed. I was a little disappointed he went to China, didn't say anything about human rights, and I'm a little disappointed his most recent visit to Argentina and all of that. And I recognize I'm in Baltimore, which is where it all started here, so I hope this isn't directly wired back to Rome, because I'm also Catholic. But I think he's actually given me some hope. So I don't know who the leaders are. And then that gets me to sort of the second theme. So the declining country's one. The other is, and this I've just arrived at, and I can't prove this to you, but I'm 71. I'm a Vietnam vet. Went through the 60s and the 70s at that horrendous time. Many of you may have done that as well. I won't presume anybody's age, but we're here when a lot of that went on. And I'm actually, having been through all that, I think we'll get through this. But we've got now our 4th baby boomer president. And I think I haven't done the math, but I'll put President Obama in there. And what my peers have talked about for a decade is there's a possibility we'll turn this country over in worse shape than we got it. And we'll be the first generation that did that as a country. And I'm sort of on the verge of, I don't know if my generation, I don't know if we can turn it around. And so I'm invested in young people, have been for a long time, so I'm starting to talk to them about not defecting from it, because I think we'll continue to work as hard as we can, but they need to be thinking about they're going to have to turn this around. The debt issue, if you don't follow that, I have an app on my phone if you'd like to see it. It was 9 or 10 trillion when I said that, some number like that. It's 21 today. This is not, it's a complex business. I understand that. This is pretty basic math to me. And if interest rates go up, it starts to go up much quicker, et cetera. We're just going to run out of ability to pay our bills. And I haven't seen or heard many economists that think we can grow the economy at, you pick the number, 3 to 4% in order to just stop the numbers from going up. Just slow them down. And we're actually going in the other direction. And all 100, I believe, 100% of the deficit hawks just rolled over on December 1st, or whenever that, including Mick Mulvaney, who used to be, he was OMB. I watched him on Face the Nation a couple of Sundays ago after they rolled the budget out, and he just tied himself up in knots. I thought the best question, he testified later in the week on the budget. Somebody said, if you were still here, would you support that? He goes, no, I wouldn't do that. Great, honest answer, actually. So it is the debt. I mean, debt is one, and it's still up there on top of my list. I frame a view of us right now with 4 Ds and a C. And the Ds are, and these are not in any particular order, but they are disruption, and that's certainly going on. And I might be interested in how you feel about the current administration and the current president, but President Trump's symptomatic here. He's not causal. He is symptomatic of where we are as a country. And so I think we're going to keep digging. So disruption, that's certainly going on. Destruction, I am hugely concerned about the institutions. I was on doing something else yesterday morning for a couple hours, and I was at the FBI. And I can tell you, the morale in that place is, and I'm sort of a deck plate morale, doesn't take long. It's like walking on a ship. You can figure out within, not very long what the morale is. The morale in that place is at the bottom. Haven't been in the State Department, but I'm talking to enough people, young ones there to know it's equally bad there. So the destruction, and this is a worry to me, is the institutional destruction, not just the people side. The people thing is certainly part of it, but the institutional destruction. And I'm a people guy, so you got to recruit them, you got to retain them, you got to promote them. And I was in D.C. this morning. I can't remember exactly what the form was, but there are not young ones now that I'm starting to hear that want to go into State Department for Foreign Service. Why would you? And this now back to decline, if you will, and don't give up on us in 1 year or 8 years. The other thing that's going on that I can't figure out yet is the speed of everything. Everything's happening at rocket speed, it seems, much more quickly. So the destruction of these agencies, it's much deeper and more devastating than I think most of us know at this point. So the disruption, the destruction, the division, and the division, and again, it's easy to, the president makes himself a pretty good target every single day or many times a day. President Trump didn't usher this in. This has been ushered in, when I would talk about this 4 or 5 years ago, the political paralysis, polarization, I'd get a question, so what do we do about it? And I believe in the system, I believe in our democracy, I believe in our elections, all of that. And my answer was, until we have a throw the bums out election. American people finally get fed up and say, this is it. And we didn't have that. We had one branch that got thrown out, but the other branch, they're all still here. In fact, I'm a Navy guy. And I don't want to offend anybody, but I mean, and our tradition is when the ship goes aground, Captain, see you later, walks off the brow at that particular point in time. So the Democratic Party went about 100 miles of ground on November 8th, in my view. And 2 weeks later, we re-elect the captains of the ship. Period. The same people that brought us all this. And on both sides, with rare exception, the leaders that fomented this and brought us to this position are still there. And I don't expect much change until we see them change out. And I think that's going to be all. Because what it's become, in my view, is it's all about power. It's not about delivering for the American people. It's all about staying and money and power. And then the last D is discrimination. If you don't think we have a race problem in this country, you have not been looking. And we do. And it is a hard one. And it is not just going to be fixed by people talking about it. It was certainly highlighted in the tragedy in Charlottesville. And it is now empowered because of the politics. And we cannot let this happen. Yes, we've made a lot of progress. Easy for me to say, middle-class kid that didn't have to go through all of that. I tell a story. I grew up in LA, my third class, after my first year at the Naval Academy, I'm home after summer cruise in August of '65, and I'm watching TV in my mom and dad's house, and I'm watching Watts burn. It was 15 miles away. It could have been the moon to me. 15 miles. It could have been the moon. The only time I ever went down there was to watch sporting events. So we have to address this, and we cannot just expect someone else to address it. And it's hugely challenging. Lincoln's words, my wife and I did it in September. We did an extensive tour up in Gettysburg. And this was on a Tuesday. And we literally got in the car and we're just full of Lincoln's words. But think about what we had to go through as a country to get to those words, those healing words, and the kind of leadership and courage that he represented. And we get in the car, we're driving up to New York. I'm going up to United Nations week, if you will. And I turn it on and I hear our president's speech. And I mean, literally juxtapositioned were the words of our current president with the words that are ringing in my head with Lincoln. It's where we are, and it's symptomatic. It's symptomatic, and we the people have to rise up and stop it and fix it. And I can talk a little bit about that. Those are the 4 Ds. The one that I'm most worried about, and if you haven't had a chance, look up online in the Atlantic this month and read the Manafort article. How Manafort, Steele, and Atwater, in one author's opinion, came to town with Reagan in the early 80s, fundamentally changed politics. And it is all about the money, and it is as corrupt as any country in the world. And my challenge in Afghanistan was, when I finally landed on corruption, is why aren't we doing anything about corruption in Afghanistan? Because it's undermining our whole strategy there. We show up, we're the good guys in the hats. We show up in the village. We say we're here to help. The people go, great. We help with their security. A year later, we're there with the same people, and we say we're here to help. And they go, why are you still supporting this unbelievably corrupt government that's taken everything we have? We don't know as a country what to do about corruption. I can't tell you the number of times I try to turn the discussion in the Situation Room on Afghanistan to, can we talk about corruption? We had the goods, I saw them, we had the goods on several of Karzai's group, not Karzai, Karzai's group. I mean, they built $1 billion from the local bank. We had it, and I could not get our government to do anything about it. Why? In my judgment, because the politics wouldn't handle it, basically. So I've spent a fair amount of time on corruption globally, and I have someone I'm very close to that's worked hard in Nigeria and Honduras and did Afghanistan, et cetera. It's here. And quite frankly, I could make the case that the Supreme Court facilitated this. Okay? And there is, it's back to, there is nothing, there's nothing that can't be politicized right now. Absolutely nothing. There's nothing, all the things that used to be sacred, including the military, which frightens me no end. So that's sort of one series of thoughts. I'll quickly walk around the world. This is a foreign affairs thing. I mentioned Putin. So Robbie and I, when we went to Severomorsk, which is up in the Kola Inlet, in the Cold War, that was ground zero for the the Soviets' Navy, the Russian fleet. And we went up there for 4 days. It was extraordinary. And they didn't have a ruble to rub together. They didn't have two, and the value was going down every day. And the reason I bring that up, because I think it's really important, and it is part of Putin's chemistry, is yes, we won the Cold War, but what we didn't do at the end of the Cold War is what we did after World War II. Instead of helping the vanquished countries, we stood on Putin's neck and we gloated. And if you think that guy is ever gonna ever forget that, you're talking about the wrong guy. So, and we've got him for a long time. And he has, in fact, brought them back. Crimea was an example. The Ukraine is another. And then he's killing us with no resources in cyber and the kinds of things that he's doing in that warfare. It was Mark Edwards. I had one of my officers when I was a CNO talking. We were doing a war plan in Iran, on Iran. And there was a cyber piece, we didn't call it cyber, but basically that was it. And he was my cyber guy. And so we were talking about it, and I was saying, okay, well, if this ever happens, this is what we're going to do. He looks at me and says, I think maybe the war's already started. That stuck with me. And that's where we are right now with Putin. And what I worry about, and he's not an easy guy. Bush tried to have a relationship, Obama tried to have a relationship, and Trump has a relationship to be determined. And none of it worked. None of it worked. Again, that's sort of the empirical evidence. And he's a strong man. And the way I learned to deal with strongman is you play Russian roulette, you put a round in every chamber, you cock the gun, you put it to his temple, and then he goes, I guess you're serious. So now we'll have a conversation. That's how strongmen think. You can't coax them to the table. You have to force them to the table. Putin's had a lot of runway. Syria's a great example. We didn't say stop here, and he's continued to this day. And actually, I didn't know this until the other day. He's got all his brand new weapon systems in Syria, basically as a testing ground, among other things. So he will take as much runway as possible. And then, I could talk a long time about Europe. They're petrified. They're petrified of him. 3 years ago, I thought we could pay less attention to Europe. That's just not true anymore. And who would have thought that a refugee crisis in Syria and the wave that created would have changed the politics all the way to, Iowa in the United States, Brexit, Hungary, Poland, those countries that are nationalizing as we speak. So, dangerous guy, $3 billion GDP, going nowhere, by the way, but the value is a lot more than that. And I think we have to figure out how to engage him, let the GDP run. He does get a vote, and not corner him so badly that these strategic weapons that I thought we took off the table, and I negotiated the New START treaty with my Russian counterpart, and it's coming up in a couple of years for renegotiation, and I wonder whether we're going to do that. But somehow these doomsday weapons get pulled back on the table because he doesn't have a lot of options. So Putin's top of my list. I think the most important bilateral relationship in the 21st century is us and China. It's, for me, fairly simple, the two biggest economies in the world and the biggest potential. I had some hope a few years ago we might figure out China and have a relationship that was working. I'm not there anymore. King Xi wants to displace us. And one of the best lines that represents that, I don't know if it was him or Hu Jintao, but that along the lines of a few years ago said, hey, that Pacific's a big ocean. we'll just draw a line down the middle. You know, you take the east, we'll take the west. They want us gone from there. And you see the investments he's making all over. They're not all great investments, and there are challenges associated with it. I gave a speech at one of their universities in 2011. I was there on a counterpart visit, and those visits were always on and off and very difficult. So I've got, I don't know, 400 or 500 students and the faculty, and so I made some remarks and took some questions. And the question that I remember the most was this young woman student, and these questions are all planted by the PLA, and I know that. So she stands up a few feet from me, and she goes, yes, Admiral, we've had a bad 300 years. But we are the Middle Kingdom. We're back. What is it you don't understand? Get out of the way. And that's China to me. In many ways, much more complex. But believe me, they do believe in their history. And in a way, that's a disadvantage to us because we don't do history well at all. We don't do ours well, and I'm not overly critical, much less do history in other parts of the world. So China, subset of China is obviously North Korea, and I'm as worried about that peninsula as I've ever been. So I would say that he doesn't have a missile right now that can reach us, so with a nuclear weapon on it. So technically there's some time to have a policy decision that is constructive and results in a peaceful outcome. But I'm not overly optimistic. And again, this is another place that, you know, our president may win this thing. I mean, he's playing high-stakes poker. It's high risk. And I don't know that Kim Jong-un doesn't look at him and say, what do I got here, just like everybody else is. And that uncertainty can be a great strength. I just don't know. What's happened in the last week in Korea that I don't know what to do with, and if there's an expert here, I'd love to hear it, is during the Olympics, the discussions around the young people who are not interested in unification. I know that's a big deal. I haven't figured it out yet. I was at the session last night, and there were two Army officers that were married to Koreans, South Koreans, and I asked one of them, and she's probably 30, you know, but I thought it was like she was talking about, or we talk about our kids. They don't understand. I mean, they're too young. What are they doing? What's this generation doing? She was talking about 20-year-olds like that, because the 30s and up were supporting the president and unification. The young ones are not. That's a bit, I know in my heart that's a big deal. I just haven't figured out what it means yet. But that's a huge shift from where they were. So North Korea, I can talk I won't talk a long time about the Middle East. I think the Middle East, we're on a 40-year, 50-year boil, quite frankly, and I think we need to make sure it doesn't come unglued. At the same time, we can't solve it, and certainly we've tried. We can't solve it. And usually in these discussions, I'll talk about everything east and west, and I have a very difficult time getting to anything north and south. We don't do north and south very well. I mean, strategically, if we had a relationship, we locked up everything from the North Pole down to the South Pole in this hemisphere. The economic bloc, the political bloc, the like-mindedness bloc, the human rights bloc, the values bloc is just huge. But we've been doing east and west for so long, we almost don't know how to look. And then the other south is Africa, which is coming. And it's got some great resources and some great challenges. But we don't have I mean, we, generally speaking, we're not spent a lot of time on that. So that's sort of the geopolitical piece, per se. So my top 5, debt, I won't spend any time specific. K through 12, education in the country. 30 years we've been talking about this and not fixing it. The political paralysis. Cyber because along with those strategic nuclear weapons, cyber is actually existential. Cyber can fundamentally change our way of life. It's almost like they're just toying with us right now. but you shut down our financial system for a significant period of time, and we're in trouble. You shut down our logistics system. You take our electric grid out in a way that, which we do a pretty good job of every now and then, because it's so fragile. What was it a few years ago, the tree in Ohio that fell and put out the Northeast, just as an example. So cyber's hugely dangerous, and we're shifting in that direction. And it's a cheap tool, as we've seen with Russia and with China, quite frankly. And then the last sort of top priority for me are the vets and their families, and I mentioned that. That's just personal with us. So those are some thoughts. What's the optimistic side? Well, first of all, this is a great country, and I believe that, and I believe we will get through this. We got through Nixon. We'll get through this, and we'll be better for it. It won't be the same get through for sure, but we'll be better for it. I actually believe. Back to Chairman, 2.2 million. The average age, young men and women, the average age in any unit is 21 years old. They are remarkable. And when we get to them, or when they get to us, they're going to lead this country, and we're going to be all right. I really believe that, despite the bad press and some of the data analysis that shows the millennials are not interested. I've just seen too many that are, and I'm working with a bunch as well that care a lot. The other thing is, in terms of solution set here, what do we do? I turned on an NPR interview about a year ago, and I was halfway through, so I don't know the school, but this senior up at a very liberal Northeast college is being interviewed, and classic senior question, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? This was right after the election, and she goes, I've been up in this echo chamber here for 4 years, listening to all my friends, and it's all blue, 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 blue. She's from Southwest Pennsylvania, where her whole family is red, 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 red. And out of the mouth of babes, she said, I have to go home and find out why my family feels the way they do. We have got to get out of our echo chambers, and we have to listen. There was a piece on NBC a year ago, Tom Brokaw, 50 Years of News, from 66 to 16 to 2016, and it seems like he was Forrest Gump, because he was seemingly at every major event that occurred in 50 years. He interviewed Maria Shriver for this briefly, and Maria said, I was married to a Republican governor. Obviously, I'm a Democrat. I was disgusted with my own party, so I resigned from my party. I didn't know that until she said that. And Brokaw, wonderfully incisive, says, so what'd you learn? She goes, I learned there are a lot of really great Republicans with some really good ideas. So we have got to listen, and we cannot expect someone else to solve these problems for us. Local, community, that's actually where it all comes from my perspective. It's almost like I'm stuck on insurgencies. I've been in so many of them, militarily, but it's almost like it's got to come from here, because it ain't coming from down the road. That's my view. But the resources, the people, the concerns, we have to address them, and I hope we can do it before we have some catastrophic event that gets our attention. So with that, that's a view, and I'm happy to take your questions. Thanks for listening. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am. The question was, we've gerrymandered everything, and so there's from a partisan standpoint, and the debt is an example of a result of that. And I assume you just want my view on sort of, where that is. Back when it was put into place, politically, everybody thought it was brilliant if you were doing it. I don't think we had a clue of the consequences, but I think it has increased the polarization and the emphasis. And although and there are some initiatives now to start to break that up, but that's going to take some time. There's no question about that. But I'm not sure even if I could wave a wand and un-gerrymander everything overnight. I'm not sure if I could get away from the gated communities. I'm not sure if I could get away from like-minded living with like-minded. And the move, literally the physical move, when you look at, you haven't seen one since the election, but when you looked at those election maps, you know, and it was either all blue or all red. And this, when you sort of got down to counties, I mean, that kind of thing. And so it's going to take leaders. A dear friend of mine, very liberal woman in Washington, and before that, out and about internationally, think tanker doing that kind of work. She just recently bought a place in West Virginia, and I know her. She's also a don't just say it, go do it. And the guy next door to this property she bought, first thing he says to her is, "You're not coming to take my property, are you?" So there's no trust. There's no trust, and it's that I don't think you solve. I mean, things like gerrymandering will solve to some degree. Will come back if we want them to as a people. But effectively, what we're doing is permitting and executing this strategy of division and polarization, which is bad. Yes, sir. The question is, in 8 years, if we have 8 years of President Trump, where will we be? Where will China be, et cetera? China will be a lot further down the road, although they got a long way to go. This is my belief. We'll be in a really bad place, but I think it's a place we can recover from. Now, the factor for me, as I said earlier, is speed here. Speed is an issue because he's moving pretty quickly. I also have a lot of friends that say, well, you know, he's going to get hammered in the congressionals. Every president gets hammered in the congressionals. It might be a little worse. They may lose the Senate. They may lose the House. I don't think that's determinative at this point anyway. Back there, yes, sir. The predicate is the debt is a problem. Do we have the right level of military spending? And how do you balance that versus the other challenges that we have? Schools, infrastructure, et cetera. The budget, I think, that just got submitted was $710 billion, too much money, okay? And I used to be a budget guy. The Pentagon has enough money, they've had enough money. The problem in the Pentagon is where we spend it. That's another issue. We have twice as many civilians in the Secretary of Defense's office, in the Pentagon, sorry, twice as many as we had in 2000. That's not an inexpensive investment. We used to have what I would call notionally 1-to-1 with respect to military in the Pentagon, and now it's 2-to-1. Too much overhead there. And once you create that bureaucracy, it becomes very difficult to tear it out. If you took the $710 billion and put it all in the debt, it would be a drop. We're not going to solve the problem of the debt until we get at Medicare, Medicaid, and health care, period. It's just financially, there's not, because it is burying us, and it will continue. There are other things that can contribute to this. On the one, I'll say there's too much money in the Pentagon. What's happened in the budget in the Pentagon since 2012 with sequestration and with the continuing resolution, it's devastating. I'm not proud of this. This is very hard, and I testified many times. It's very hard to articulate. I'm a ship guy. We've killed 17 sailors in recent times, tragically. There's 2 reviews out there, and you can pretty much pull them down online, I think. The one from the Secretary of the Navy that Gary Ruffhead authored has a wonderful encapsulation of the impact of the readiness CR sequestration issue. And it's hard to quantify and it's hard to speak to. It's the best piece, and I'll tell actually any service chief ought to read that because every service chief has gone through their own version of that. That needs to be fixed. That readiness money, no kidding, needs to be out there. We're also right now, and this is this week for me, But in the last week or so, I've started to see retention issues with our junior officers and our mid-grade enlisted. That always happens after a war. It's even though the wars aren't over, politically they're over, conveniently. But they're not. We've still got thousands in harm's way. But now economy's doing better, airlines are higher, and I'm starting to see JOs that are starting to leave, all the services, which is a concern. So again, that takes, to get that solved, that takes courageous leadership, and there isn't much there. And what baffles me is the politicians who put all this political money in the bank and they never cash it in. And Angela Merkel, who pretty conservative individual, and I don't mean just politically, I mean she's a very well-studied, steady, doesn't take a lot of risk, really looks at what she has to do. She's a hero for me for stepping up on the refugee crisis. And she cashed it all in and she almost lost it. And to me, that's the kind of those are the kinds of leaders that we need. And I don't know who they are. I haven't seen one for a long time. Yes, sir. So the question is the divisive rhetoric, will that really affect the military, and would it cause a division in the military to turn against each other and or obviously, I would think, the administration. So Jim Mattis leads the military right now, and he's been brilliant in my view. I know him exceptionally well. And right now, the president is not tearing the military apart like the FBI, like the State Department. And maybe others, but I mean, so those are two visible ones. So I think from a morale standpoint, we're fine. We have a tendency in uniform to march off and do what the president wants. We literally, with rare exception, we don't talk politics and we don't know each other's politics. So they'll hear it, but they're not going to disobey the president. I don't think it would get to that. But it is, I talked to the CNO actually right after Charlottesville. CNO was down, actually was in a gym down in Virginia Beach working out that morning. It was raining like crazy. And I happened to see him the next 3 or 4 days later. And I don't see him that often, but the gym's jammed. Charlottesville's going on. He's listening to what the president said. And he is responsible for 330,000 sailors, and he felt obligated as a leader to make sure that they knew where he was, which people might argue, and he tweeted right away and said, "This is not us," or words to that effect. And every other chief followed immediately. And that was never, obviously, Mattis knew that. There's a great quote when Mattis was traveling in Jordan, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago. And he was interacting with the troops out there, visiting Jordan, but interacting with our troops out there. And I'm not sure who it was, but he was caught on audio saying to the troops, you have to hold the line. Now that's a military term. It's a warfighting term. But you got to hold the line until we get all this sorted out in Washington. So he's a great leader, and I'm comfortable we're a long way away. I know we're a long way away from where we were when I grew up in the 60s and 70s with the riots and the social scene from that standpoint. Part of your question to me is, does that roll into the military? And I have not heard anything like that. And I think we'd have to go quite a ways before that happened, is how I'd say it. Although I think your question's a great question. What's my opinion about the media and how it stirs up the soup all the time? I think that's what the media does. I actually believe Trump has been good for the media because it has let me tell you, I know a lot of them. They're never working harder to get their facts right. They've never worked harder in most cases. Now, there's a couple channels I don't consider the media. I just don't on either side. But I know a lot of people in the business, and they really are working hard to get their facts right.
I meant the cultural divide that goes on with the media. The racial divide, the way they play one thing against the other in the media.
Well, I mean, at its base, they're still trying to create headlines, and that does. So, I mean, they're a big part of it. I mean, it's the fourth estate. I told you I grew up, my dad was a journalism major. I grew up in a messaging family, if you will. I've been around. I'm a big believer in a free press. But they got to get it right. And of course, there's the 24/7. There's, there are channels that run all the time. There are stories that and they have to be quick. So we're very much in the middle of all that sea change as well. So, am I out of time? I want to get to this, and I apologize for not taking any more questions. So, and I mentioned the bulwark. These three generals, all of whom I know well, and a lot of people have taken great comfort in that. One, and it goes back to what I said about walking to the White House. You're a military guy, you're walking into a world unknown to you. And that's the same world Mattis and Kelly and McMaster walked into. Even though they're civilians, this is a world they have not been in. So that's one thought. Secondly, we're not as good as everybody says we are. Okay? We're good, but we're human, we make mistakes, and we have limits. I know their limits because I'm a military guy and I work with them. And the ability to perform in that environment is limited to some level. H.R. McMaster, who spoke in Munich last weekend, I think, or 2 weekends ago now, and was hammered by the boss almost immediately. And there are now rumors, and I don't know, honestly, I don't know that he's on his way out. So now we're down to Mattis. So my point is, the bulwark is crumbling. I'm not a big fan of the bulwark anyway. I'm not totally shocked at this. And then what are we going to do? What are we going to do then? And who's going to go serve this president? There are people I know, really good Republicans, who would have gone in January, February, March that won't go now. It's not a perfect analogy, but normally you get a weaker team in administration 2, in every administration. This is speed. We're now in year 2. So, and it's a tough question back to, would you go serve? Because the country needs you. The country is desperate for good people to go serve. Thanks. God bless.